Comic Geek Speak presents Murd's Time Bubble, the 24th time. I'm home. Welcome back aboard the Time Bubble, one and all. I am your humble Captain Courageous, Adam Murdo, once again braving the vagaries of the time stream to bring you some quality back-issue reviews. I apologize, as I always must, because so much time inevitably elapses between recordings of this podcast. You'd think a guy with a time machine at his command could release episodes in a more timely manner, but, I've faced that accusation before. I've come up with a good boilerplate excuse for it, and you're just going to have to look elsewhere to find out what that is, because I'm not going to tell you right now. But anyway, I'm here now, I'm now, and I'm happy to say that I have not made the voyage back from the time stream alone this time. That's right, for only the, not counting my cat Tammy, this is only the second time in Time Bubble history that I have brought with me a guest co-pilot. Please, Mystery Man, enter and sign in.
Hi, it's Shane Kelly.
It's Shane Kelly!
Wow, I didn't realize it was just me the second time.
That's right. It's you and the esteemed, late lamented Jamie D.
Yeah, wow.
He's the only other person to sit in that co-pilot's chair.
That's good company to be in, huh? That's for sure.
Yep. The co-pilot selection process is very rigorous.
Yeah. I went through it. I had to fill out quite some forms and get some permission from the family.
It's the cross-time authority there.
Well, and I told them, if I get lost, look for me down the road. If you see a really old man or a really young boy, don't get too freaked out if I know stuff about you that you may not realize.
Don't worry. This isn't either of our first rodeos this time. What do you think of the interior here?
It's good. It's clean. It's just like I expected. I was hoping for the cat, but maybe next time.
Yeah, I'm afraid Tammy, the Titanic time tabby, has... I think she's chasing a saber-toothed mouse back in the Pleistocene.
Okay.
Yeah, but it's just the two of us for this trip.
I like the bumper sticker that's new that says, "When will then be now." That's clever.
Yeah, that was a gift, actually.
Yeah, I figured.
But yeah, Jamie appreciated that it was bigger inside than out. So.
Oh, yeah. Well, anybody who likes the Doctor Who and the TARDIS and all that would expect the time machine to be a little bit bigger on the inside.
See?
And I certainly appreciate that as well.
Mm-hmm. So you're showing your qualification to sit in that seat right now.
Heck yeah. I ran into Brewster Gold outside, but no, this is just my trip, not yours.
Did he snub you?
He did a little bit.
Yeah, figures.
When I said no, he kind of looked the other way and, oh, that's all right, I've got a date.
That freaking guy.
Yeah. I love him anyway.
Yeah.
He's cool.
He's your bro.
That's right.
All right. So then, let's get down to some comics here.
Okay.
And Shane was good enough to play by the time bubble rules here, which I explained to him in detail. It's just a matter of choosing what our target time period was going to be and then finding some back issues that he had read at that time.
Yep.
And, if you have any, anecdotes relating to where you were, what you were doing when you bought and or read that comic for the first time.
Oh, okay.
Well, feel free to share them.
All right.
I'll go first.
Go right
I'll
ahead.
get the ball rolling here just to set the tone. I think each of us have one Marvel and one DC.
That is correct.
And then we're going to join together on a jam review for the last comic we'll talk about. There'll be a total of 5 more or less full-length reviews on this episode of the Time Bubble. And and that's something that we've both read, and it was just a little advance hint here. I don't know why I keep looking. I'm already getting...
We're so used to the cameras in the studio that when we're in the bubble,
Yes.
we kind of look up for them as well.
Right, but there is no visual dimension to the time bubble. I'm sorry, folks, but there's just too much subspace interference. The video feed just doesn't make it out of the time stream.
Yeah.
So you're just going to have to settle for our lovely sonorous voices as we go forward here. So the last comic that we'll talk about is going to be something that both of us have read and enjoyed. And when it bubbled up to the top of my to-be-read pile, I thought immediately of Shane. And it was at that point that I extended to him the invitation.
Yeah, I appreciate it. It was fun to revisit that comic in particular.
Oh, I thought so. It must have been a watershed moment.
Oh, yeah.
So the first... it's going to be a DC book for me first.
Okay.
We're focusing on August of 2001 here. This is the target time. Well, cover date of August 2001, which means that these are things that were probably released in June of that year.
Correct.
So I would have just... I would have been out of my first senior year of school for about a month at the time these things were on the racks.
Oh, get out.
Yep.
Wow.
Still on the edge of the brink of innocence that was the summer of 2001 as, tragic events of that fall came by and had a huge impact on every walk of American life, including her comic books.
Let's see, 2001, I would have been married 6 years almost, and we were pregnant with Ben.
Really?
Yep.
All right.
I would have been 29.
How about that?
Yeah.
So you're an expectant dad while these things were going through your head. Okay, well, that might have colored your reading a little bit.
Later months it did, yeah. Yeah, it's as the events of September of that year happened.
Simple sleep deprivation probably would have, too.
Well, that didn't happen till December, till 2002, really.
Gotcha.
The sleep deprivation part, but...
Understood. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to talk about here is something you might have in your collection, Shane, because it is a Batman comic.
I don't have it anymore. I caught a glimpse of the cover as you picked it up. Mm-hmm. I almost picked it, though, and I was going to figure out a way to get it because I love that cover.
It's a Brian Boland cover, if you're wondering, those listening at home. We're talking about Batman Gotham Knights number 18. This is the series that took the place of Batman Shadow of the Bat when it was discontinued in the year... It was either 2000 or late 99, but I don't. To this day, I'm still not exactly sure why they felt it was necessary to cancel that particular comic, because they replaced it with one that was almost exactly like it. It was.
I don't think that was the intent for that series originally. That was supposed to be more focused on the supporting cast of Batman.
Well, that was the idea of Shadow of the Bat.
Oh, well, that's true too.
Yeah, like supporting cast members and just everyday citizens of Gotham, people. Whose lives are peripheral to Batman's and who fall under his influence. The shadow of the Bat falls upon
I was thinking Legends of the Dark Knight.
There you go, which was also kind of anthology-related.
Very much so.
But a different kind of Bat anthology. Yeah. But Batman Gotham Knights, much like Shadow of the Bat, tended to be arc-oriented. It wasn't a single continuity. It would the focus would jump around to different members of Batman's supporting cast, and that's pretty much just what Shadow of the Bat was. One notable difference for the first, actually most of the books were Let me just calm down for a moment here. Most of the first 3 years of the book were written by a single writer. Okay, so there was at least a single creative vision going on here. And that writer was the lady who wrote this issue, Devin K. Grayson.
Okay.
Yep, which is a name that we don't hear often enough in comic book discussions these days for my taste.
Yeah.
I think her byline hasn't popped up in very many recent comics.
No,
I think she was part of some kind of an all-female creative jam team, or a jam... why am I having such difficulty? I think that subspace interference is getting into my brainwaves right now. But so she did some kind of all-female creative team issue of Red Sonja a little while ago. But other than that, she's been largely absent from the creative scene. But for a while there, in the late 90s, early 2000s, she was doing a number of things for DC. She had that Titans run that she did, and she was... been very, very interested in the Batman family of characters in particular. Her origin, as it were, as a comics writer, was that she just was one day happened to tune into an episode of the old Batman animated series, like the Dini and Tim one, and just happened to see a scene of Batman and Robin either in the Batcave or in the Batmobile, just having a conversation with each other. And it had never occurred to her before that these superhero characters were people, and that they could just relate to one another as people, as human characters, rather than just sets of costumes and powers.
Sure.
And from that, just captured her imagination, sunk its talons into it, and next thing she knew, she was making her way to New York City and just begging to be given something to do. She was willing to sweep floors and empty garbage cans just to get closer to these characters. And here she is, as of August of 2001, living the dream by writing the monthly adventures of Batman and his supporting cast. The Gotham Knights series, as of this point, I think there were only 1 or 2 issues of the first 18 that she hadn't scripted.
Okay.
One notable exception being, I think, issue number 14, which was an Officer Down crossover.
Oh, yes.
You remember that story?
Oh, yes.
Yep. And Commissioner Gordon suffered a pretty serious injury and decided to step down as commissioner.
Yeah.
Which was, of course, a temporary retirement, as I think everyone must have known even then that it would be. But that was written by Greg Rucka. But here she is, back on top of things with Batman Gotham Knights number 18, a story that is pretty obviously based on certain things that are certain lines of dialogue inside the issue, happens in the wake of Gotham Knights, of Officer Down. And the front cover that Shane mentioned, which is a very, very memorable one, Batman doesn't even appear on the cover of this issue. Instead, it's this is I say this happens in the wake of Officer Down, but it also gives us a few of the delayed aftershocks of the Cataclysm and No Man's Land stories. Yep. The cover shows the famous giant penny of the Batcave. It's apparently in some kind of a subterranean pool. It's underwater, and there's a bunch of rubble around the base of it, and kind of perched there by the rubble, looking out at the reader and
what?
Giving a shrug of confusion, is Aquaman. And this is indeed the 90s Aquaman, too. This is the Peter David era Aquaman with the beard, the shell crown, showing his regalia as king of the seas, and his golden metal cybernetic hand. And he's using that hand to shrug and give the reader kind of a comedy take. Now what do I do?
Yeah.
I'm Aquaman, and I don't know what to do with this giant penny. And that's and the laughs just keep on coming. Well, not really. I mean, there are some elements of humor in this story, but it's also fairly poignant and emotional. Other than that, the title of the story is Cavernous, and the point that I think Grayson is trying to get across with that title is she's trying to evoke the sensations of emptiness that Batman is feeling at this particular point in his life. He's the status quo of his supporting cast are that he's had a falling out with Robin. The two of them aren't really getting along at this as of summer of 2001. Alfred has taken one of his several leaves of absence. Yeah. Neither of them are in his employ. That's all Batman has to say about that personally in this story. But they're off the table. This is during the time that Nightwing was in Bloodhaven, living a life of his own. And so Batman is just left alone with his thoughts in a very big, empty, cavernous Batcave. Yeah. He finds himself in the very first page. We catch him having a conversation with a little bat hanging upside down from a stalactite. So he's talking to himself. And shortly after that, Aquaman patches in a call from the JLA watchtower. He apparently is kind of bored too. Slow night all over the world, including in Gotham City, for crime. So Aquaman is just giving Batman a call to say, well, he says he's just heard about Gordon. So that tells us that this is happening after Officer Down. And Batman, of course, blows him off. And it's kind of funny because this is a story about what are possibly the two most brusque, laconic, no-nonsense characters in the Justice League, if not the entire DC universe. And it's all about them attempting to connect emotionally. So it can't help but be a little bit on the funny side. So then what follows are several pages of Batman basically trying to figure out what to do with himself, because it is a slow crime night. So he puts in a couple of calls really, to Oracle, just kind of pestering her about, have you tried instigating surveillance in this place? Have you tried putting a wiretap here? Are there any movements in the Vincenzo case? And finally, the third time he calls Dick, because things are always funniest in threes, it's Dick Grayson who picks up without a shirt. And he says, have you considered giving it a rest? and so Batman, and this is the one, Devin K. Grayson has been, she's got, for my money, like an 80% success rate as far as coming into these characters, many of which she hadn't even really known anything about prior to that life-changing viewing of an episode of Batman, the animated series. Mm-hmm. But she just did some crass research upon coming to DC to try to do some writing work for them. And a lot of the time, on fairly limited exposure to the published history of these characters, she's able to spin a very effective and knowledgeable portrait of their character. Doesn't always work out that way. Every once in a while something gets through the cracks that I think strikes a sour note. And one thing that I didn't think really is in character for Batman here is that when Dick snaps at him to give it a rest, he just gets this thoroughly chastened look on his face, and he says, "Sorry, Dick," and hangs up.
Yeah, that probably wouldn't ring true to Batman, from what we think of him.
But it's good for a bit of a laugh. Anyway. Yeah. It's funny because the relationship between Batman and Dick Grayson is the thing that brought Devin Grayson to comics in the first place. So anyway, then there follows this interesting 2-page spread. I'm showing it to Shane right now. It's drawn by artist Roger Robinson. Mm-hmm. And it shows it across the top of the page. It's just this big shot of Batman stretching out his gloved hands.
Lunging towards something.
Coming to get you. And below that is a sequence of 10 illustrated sequential panels showing him foiling various petty crimes throughout that night in Gotham. Finally, then the sun begins to rise. And then we have several wordless pages, effective... just graphic storytelling, minus the verbal component of just Batman knocking around this big, empty manor house that he has all to himself now, trying to figure out what to do with himself, just looking like this big, cowled ghost or wraith just drifting around the empty hallways. He sits down in his library. In the span of, there's a shot of a grandfather clock to show you how much time has passed.
Yeah.
40 minutes, he reads a whole stack of books. He lingers in Dick's old childhood bedroom for a couple of minutes. Finally, he swallows his pride, goes back downstairs, calls Aquaman, and, on the pretext of raising this penny, the giant penny from which fell down into the subterranean pool after the earthquake hit, he invites Aquaman down there. And there's a few pages of fairly awkward but still amusing conversation, during which Batman is only kind of half paying attention. The two of them, in their own stilted and unemotional way, manage to come to... Aquaman realizes why he's really here. Batman just wanted a friend.
Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but Aquaman's on monitor duty up in the watchtower at this time?
That's right.
Most times, I wouldn't think he'd leave the tower on monitor duty, but I guess you forward that to the Batcave computer, and if something happens, it'll blink away.
Yeah, it's a slow night.
Yeah.
And then he's able to use the JLA teleporter to get down to the Batcave from there.
And a little bit odd that Batman was walking around the manor above, looking through all those rooms, still dressed as Batman. Not that he necessarily has to get undressed and be Bruce Wayne up there for this kind of a story, but I don't really know that he just parades around the manor dressed as Batman all that time, just in case or something crazy would happen. I usually remember him being Bruce Wayne up there. So a little bit odd, not odd in a bad way, but just telling about his, what am I going to do? Why bother getting changed? Nobody's here anyway. Kind of thing, strolling around the manor.
Who am I going to be Bruce Wayne for tonight?
Yeah.
It's like and I think Matt would probably have some interesting things to say about this, because he and I always argue over who's the more authentic self for Batman. Is it the Batman costumed identity, or is it Bruce Wayne?
Yeah.
And here, I think Batman is having that same internal argument.
Oh, yeah.
Honestly, because I think Devin Grayson is remembering a little something that, what the Bronze Age has always known. And that the Bronze Age portrayal of Batman is that he is first and foremost Bruce Wayne. Every once in a while, he's able to allow himself to take a night off, just stay home and listen to the Gotham Knights game on the radio.
Yeah.
Or maybe he'll actually call up one of his friends and do something. That Batman could allow himself to do that in the Bronze Age. But the post-crisis, insanely driven Batman has a lot more problem with that. And now he's reached this sort of crossroads. He's reached this terrible, toxic lull in his usual Batman routine, where he doesn't have a major villain to fight. There's not even much petty crime for him to fight. He's just left alone with his thoughts.
Yeah.
And it's at these quiet, placid moments when he's at home by himself in the Batcave that pesky second syllable in his name, man, rears its ugly head again, and he is forced to confront his sublimated humanity. And he can't bring himself to do it. I think that is why he's not taking off his Batman costume, even though he's there by himself. He's almost using it to shelter himself from the potentially harmful or painful effects of turning to face his human life and how little is left of it.
Yeah. Even taking Alfred into that equation, a lot of times I think Alfred is the one that grounds him to his humanity yet at times, reminding him, you're Bruce Wayne. You can do this, or why don't you come up here and get some sleep, or whatever it is. He's the father figure still in truth through his whole life, but even at these moments where he would say, well, come up for some food or something, and he doesn't have that. So he's at this very crossroady, confused place. Well, what do? No one's here. Why bother? Am I really the man? Am I really the Bat? What? Yeah, it could very well be. It's a very interesting issue in that way.
Yeah. And in the end, I think he chooses a bit of a compromise, because he chooses somebody he goes for a work friend, as opposed to going after somebody like I don't even know who he would call at this point.
Yeah.
Silver St. Cloud? Hardly. Actually, while Aquaman is trying to make conversation while going down there surveying the Penny situation, you can see Batman calling up Catwoman. Mm-hmm. Calling up her dossier anyway on the Bat computer and learning that she is missing and beyond even the range of his resources to find.
Yeah.
So that's who I think he'd rather be talking to.
Yeah, she's never far from his thoughts.
Yeah. But he settles for Aquaman, and in the end, I think they're both kind of glad that he does. Yeah. So, yeah, this is a very human kind of story. It's got some very funny little moments, but it's also, like I said, kind of sad and poignant. It's the kind of story that I don't think people who are big fans of the current Bat material would go for very much. They'd probably look at it as just a goof and find it very difficult to take it seriously, just because it doesn't have that super visceral, tooth-grinding, neck-popping intensity that contemporary Bat stories tend to have.
Yeah.
It's not like an illustrated video game or whatever. It actually allows some elements of humor and pathos to creep into it. So it's a good story. It shines some light onto certain dusty corners of Batman's character that don't get illuminated that often. And in addition, this is something that Gotham Knights was doing like on a monthly basis in these days. It was a $2.50 cover price, which I think was a quarter more than the average.
Yep.
There were Batman Black and White
that's right.
backup stories. Yeah, and the one that you get in this one, it's co-written by Dave Gibbons.
Oh, nice.
Famous name there, but it's also co-written and illustrated by Mick McMahon, who is a British comic artist. He's known for his Judge Dredd work, actually, which is appropriate. As I was reading this, it occurred to me that this story, which is called Fat City, by the way, it kind of felt like what would be the result if Bob Haney had written a Batman story or two for 2000 AD. And sure enough, this guy, Mick McMahon, is best known for his published work in 2000 AD. It's this weird-ass story about this semi-intelligent living blob of cellulite that lurks in the Gotham sewers and comes to the surface to prey on innocent Gothamites and feed on their body fat. And Batman has to do a brave and the bold team-up with the fattest woman in Gotham City to bring it down. It's just weird.
Interesting.
It's got this kind of wonky, almost cubist-looking artwork that Mick McMahon does. Highly distorted stuff. Batman's chin is like 3 times the size of the top of his head. So, yeah, it's a little strange. But if you're into 2000 AD stuff, it's maybe the sort of story you might be interested in picking up and reading.
Yeah.
So, yes.
Interesting.
This is a good little character moment. It's, as Shane has said, an unforgettable cover by Brian Boland. And it should be a part of the collection of any Bat fan of a certain age, let's just say. We're going to remember what Batman comics were like some 15 years ago.
Yeah. Very cool. All right.
All right, Shane, now it's your turn to spring the surprise on me.
Mine is going to be JSA number 25.
Ooh.
It's part 3 of The Return of Hawkman, which Hawkman had been absent for, who knows how long. This was a big deal back in 2001 when Hawkman was coming back.
I think he'd been gone for 5 years.
Probably.
Yeah, because he was still around as of 95 when Underworld Unleashed happened.
Okay.
And then I think, it was not too long after that. What he got from Neron in exchange for his soul was to be put more in contact with his past selves, so that he could remember. Well, in those days, past selves wasn't the word. Hawk avatars, because instead of being Prince Khufu reincarnated over and over again, characters like Silent Knight and Nighthawk were considered just past bearers of the totemic spirit of the Hawk avatar. And Qatar Hall ended up with their voices in his head. And so so kind of confusing and messed up. And it just got more so, and I think it was only shortly after the Underworld Unleashed event that book completely went tits up and went away. So yeah, let's just say about 5 years, like 96 to 2001.
Okay. This is written by Jeff Johns and David Goyer, penciled by Sadowski. Gosh, what was his first name?
Steven
Sadowski? It only says Sadowski. On inks is Bear, Maris, Neary, and Lee.
That's a lot of inkers.
That is a lot of inkers.
I recognize Michael Bear's name, and he's one of the best.
Yep. And looks like Kalisz Kals as the colorist. Peter Tomasi was the editor. This is the third part of The Return of Hawkman, which ran through the JSA title. which, God, I was such a huge fan of the JSA book as it was coming out. So splendid in bringing the JSA to the forefront and making them as large as the JLA. They were almost better in a lot of ways in their storytelling of this book, especially these first 2 years plus worth of books that came out. At this time, you have Hawkman and Hawkgirl kind of at odds. He's still immensely in love with her, and he's just accepting his reincarnation this time around and happy that he's found his love. And she's kind of not feeling it and not having any of that. It's Kendra, and she's quite bitter towards him in a lot of ways as this story opens. And I didn't even go back to look at what was happening before that. I remember the story, but I don't remember the exact events that happened in the first and second parts. But this one has Hawkman and Hawkgirl tied together, falling in a free fall to their doom. And they've come to some kind of understanding by this point, and she kind of accepts at least what he says, even though she's still not feeling it. But in the first couple pages, he's, hey, do you trust me? And she's like, well, yeah, of course, you're Hawkman. Okay, I trust you. And he breaks away the ropes, and he just leaves her behind as he plummets racing down towards a dark wingman, which is kind of one of the big baddies that's running through here.
One of the zombie Thanagarian cops.
So that he can grab his wings and, do away with the bad dark Hawkman and save himself and Kendra in the process, which is exactly what happens. This then runs to, it's called Seven Devils, and it runs through Hawkman and Hawkgirl coming to an understanding through this return of Hawkman, teaming up with the existing JSA members. At this time, you have Mr. Terrific, Flash, and it's Jay Garrick Flash, and Dr. Fate, all trapped in a room on one of the Thanagarian cities. It's the floating city of Thalrasa, home of Onamar Sin.
Mm-hmm. He's the big bad of this
story.
He's
the big baddie for the story.
He's one of those seven devils.
And it's an interesting interplay between Mr. Terrific and Flash, especially in here, because Flash is talking about how he has faith in people, and Mr. Terrific is not a faithful man. He's more grounded in science.
He's an outright atheist.
But he does have faith in his teammates, and I think that's played out very well in Infinite Crisis, come years later, not to get too far ahead, but that whole thought process, that whole belief system is really stated again from Mr. Terrific. But they do find their way out of that predicament and escape out of that prison to kind of try and team up with the rest of the JSAers that are in Thanagar, trying to help Hawkman return. You have Hawkman and Hawkgirl battling in, trying to get to everybody else and save them. Mr. Terrific, with his technology, finds a weak point in that prison cell, and Jay kind of vibrates his way through, and they break out of the wall. Dr. Fate, who I think is Hector at this, didn't know you had that in you, Hector. If I remember right, he's not normal Dr. Fate himself. He's a little scatterbrained himself at this time.
Well, he's just been reincarnated, so he's having a little trouble adjusting to both that and having an ancient Lord of Order bonded to him.
And his parents at this time are who?
Well, I think the body he's inhabiting was given birth to by, I don't think we knew this yet, but it was...
maybe not.
It was Dawn Granger, Dove, of the 90s Hawk and Dove.
Okay. All right.
But he still has all his memories from his last life as Hector Sanders Hall. So as far as he's concerned, this Hawkeye, Carter Hall, who's just come back from the dead, is his dad.
Okay. That much better. You're much better at remembering that kind of stuff than I am. I would have had to search around for that, reading it. And to talk about it, I didn't really think of it reading the book. I just read and enjoyed the book. And I'm like, okay, I remember vaguely, but now more in detail, what happens to bring Hawkman back and how this story ends to the formation of the JSA. But that kind of stuff I wouldn't have thought of just reading it until I'm talking to someone. I'm like, well, how do I explain that to you and the audience? Because, Yeah, they wouldn't have read all this either, probably. It's just me talking about it.
Yeah, that's the problem with the time bubble format. You know, we're just kind of selecting things at random and trying to verbally reconstruct the context as best we can.
It's just not a perspective I thought of when I was reading the book at home in my nice little comfy chair.
Mm-hmm. Everything is connected.
Yeah.
Everything has got its own place in time.
Throughout this little interlude battle of Hawkman and Hawkgirl trying to get in, all of a sudden you have Black Adam show up and really knock around the big baddie of this issue, which again was... I forgot his name already. Isn't that terrible?
Onimar Sin?
Onimar Sin. Thank you. And I was surprised. I don't remember him being there. I know he was not a member of the JSA, but he sure helped them out and was kind of connected to them for a long period of this series' life, so much so that Atom Smasher then kind of ended up helping him and vouching for him in a lot of ways at times. They had similar pasts. You had Sand kind of helping out and knocking people around in his elemental format and being hidden, being able to turn himself into sand. Much easier to get around to everybody and be secretive about him being there at all. And he certainly does his job there. You have Atom Smasher coming up and destroying this giant lizard-like beast creature that is threatening some of the JSAers, and he just rips him to shreds.
I think that thing's name is Crypt.
Oh, that could be. That I don't remember even reading in the book.
I seem to remember Sin had a couple of hench people. One of them was a big lizard thing called Crypt, so-called because he could swallow people into his body.
Okay.
And then there was a woman who could become intangible, and she was called Fade.
Yep, she's in here as well. And then all of a sudden, as Black Adam is battling Onimar, the rest of the JSA come up and, hey, need a hand? Because, truth be told, Black Adam's getting his butt kicked around a little bit and getting thrown around, which is kind of odd for him. He's pretty formidable, to say the least.
That's right. 6 gods crammed into one human package. But...
And just as formidable as Shazam and, dare I say, even Superman in a lot of ways on that power level. And here he is getting thrown around like a sack of potatoes. And Dr. Fate, Flash, Atom Smasher, Mr. Terrific, Hawkman, Hawkgirl, and Sand all show up and say, hey, need a hand? So then they all get together battling Onimar as he becomes this gigantic rock statuesque creature that he draws from the ground of this city that he's controlling and living in, saying that I am Thanagar, I'm going to defeat you all. And they're just going at him now. And it's going to take all of them to do it because, again, he's larger than life now.
Too right.
And Atom Smasher, while can grow, doesn't look like he grows that large to battle him by himself. I guess that was just the plot device used so that it's just not him defeating Onimar all by himself. Not that he could, just being a giant that he would grow into. But it's going to take everybody to bring down the bad guy, thus kind of encrusting this new JSA team that's kind of forming again after a shakeup just a few issues ago, if I remember right. And the last page kind of lends that idea to it with how they display the team in a classic JSA fashion. And Atom Smasher does a great job of knocking off his head. Hawkman and Hawkgirl certainly go after him. They do have a nice quiet moment where they actually do kiss. Which sort of, as the story goes on, gives Carter a little bit more hope that she's coming around, I think, than what she lets on and certainly explains towards the end. That, hey, she believes what's happening, but she's not into it yet. She's not just going to go off and marry him again just because he says so. She's got to feel it, and she's not feeling it yet.
Her aunt's soul may be squatting in her body, but they are not one and the same person.
And part of this kiss is this incredible power that for them to believe in each other, which she obviously does, because that's the kind of the crux of the explosion at the bottom of this page that brings down Onimar, at least from his rock formation. And even the artist on the splash page of the after explosion is still having them embracing each other, and this little pseudo heart-shaped explosive thing coming around, which
I see that.
I don't know that I would have noticed when I read it the first time around, but
I'm not sure I did.
But reading it now, I kind of see that. And Onimar screaming, "No!" as he's getting blown away, which he, of course, never thought would happen. Then it comes down, and the explosions ended, the rubbles falling, and Hawkman and Hawkgirl come down to the level and have a discussion, and she says, she needs time to sort this out. She's not ready for what he's proposing. And, at first he grabs her hand and kind of, hold on, she says, hold on, Carter, look, I'm not going to lie and tell you I didn't feel anything up there, that I'm not attracted to you, but you have to step back and give me some time. I have to sort things out. And that's kind of interesting because that plays out for quite a long time throughout the whole JSA story and into Hawkman in his own book, which then comes into Hawkgirl's book, even through the Brightest Day stuff, I would say. Her coming to grips with the fact that they're reincarnated lovers because she has relationships with various people throughout this time, even after Carter comes back, which is an interesting point of contention. You have the rest of the citizens around the city celebrating that Onimar is destroyed and thanking the JSAers, although they're not sure how they're going to get home. And one of them brings up his staff and swirls it around a bit and makes a big portal, and they all go back through. And it's Tarak that makes the portal for them to get through. Hawkman and Tarak have a little bit of a conversation at the end, and he says, I wish you could kind of stay around a little bit longer, or at least come back. And Hawkman says, yeah, I'll be back. Don't worry. He is of Thanagar, so he'll be back, and rightfully so.
He says that? Yeah. I am of Thanagar?
He doesn't say that. That's my words.
Okay.
But he says, I'll be back, Tarak. My heart belongs to both worlds now. You can be sure of that.
Yeah, it's true. One of the first things he said is after coming out of that pool of resurrection, or whatever it is that brings him back, is that I think I even have Qatar Hall flapping around in
yeah,
someplace.
Yeah.
He can remember all of his past lives and even one life he didn't live.
And this whole JSA story, bringing Carter back, these three parts, and then leading into his own Hawkman book, really, in my mind, with Peter's help, even back then when we were friends, even before the show, and then I know we've talked about it on the show years gone by.
Oh, yeah. Well, we did a whole Spotlight on Hawkman episode. Chris still compliments us on it every time he gets the opportunity.
Well, Peter did such a great job, and as did these books, of solidifying his history into a cohesive storytelling method, to be able to explain everything that happened in a cohesive manner that made sense, at least enough sense that it gave him a past, a history that you could explore in many different ways. And I really enjoyed what, I think it was James Robinson and Jeff Johns that did the Hawkman series then, at least for the first few arcs, was really, really interesting, good stuff. It's some of my favorite work, and I was not an aficionado of Hawkman, but through these three parts and that story of his own book really made me a fan. I have since gotten rid of all of those Hawkman books, but I did get the Hawkman Omnibus that came out. It was just such a fantastic story. And that's partially because his story rang true with some of what I was reading in Starman at that time. I really became fond of this character, and part of it's the storytelling that they chose to use to tell his story from this point forward. With some times past stuff and some exploration of his history and just his adventures. It was really an interesting time and a really well-done way to bring Hawkman back into the fold and make him prominent in the JSA. The portal happens. They come back to what is now the old brownstone, which is the new JSA headquarters. And Carter's kind of amazed because he's... oh my God, what would you call it? A curator of museums.
True.
And he's like, oh, we have our own museum now. And kind of, oh, splendid. And Carter's not entirely sure his place in this world now, but Jay kind of talks to him on this rooftop as they're overlooking their city and kind of reinforces, yeah, you have a place here and we have a place here to protect all these people. And here we are. They all get together and kind of go into the old meeting headquarters, and the whole issue ends with the newly formed or reformed JSA team consisting of Mr. Terrific, Sentinel, Midnight, Dr. Midnight, Sand, Hawkman, Hawkgirl, Atom Smasher, Dr. Fate, Flash, Stargirl, Black Canary, and Wildcat.
And they're all sitting around that big round
good old
table.
Big brown table in I'd have to see the old picture, but in a similar fashion to the way that they're seated around that good old classic iconic image. And I love all these cast of characters. At this time, it did not get any better for me than the JLA and especially the JSA.
Oh, yes.
Giving you that thing that DC's always been so grand and great at, the generational storytelling of their characters, especially at this time period as they went through Crisis on Infinite Earth and then... what was the next crisis?
0 Hour?
0 Hour, which really didn't do much to fix everything anyway.
No, just a little bit of fine-tuning.
Yeah. But when you got to this point in their history, it really gave you such a rich character pool to pull from. They even, through the course of this series, reenacted a little bit the JLA, JSA crossovers, which were so popular back in the Silver Age and Bronze Age, which I loved. I haven't read them all even, but I've read a bunch of them through various means, whether it be an annual, a special. I think there was the hardback Vice and Virtue.
Oh, yeah, right, Virtue and Vice.
Virtue and Vice. So this is my heyday of my love of DC as an adult, was this JSA series coming to life and bringing this whole generational thing. You had the old JSAers not only training the heroes of the now, but also the children of those heroes and bringing them into the fold. And it was just such a spectacular time to read these books. Jeff Johns and James Robinson, especially at this time period, really did a fantastic job with a lot of these characters. Really found some kind of niche that just resonated with so many people. And I know Brian Deemer is a huge fan of this JSA series, especially.
Yep, and this is a guy who usually didn't have any time for DC at all. But, somehow it was communicated to him that this was a book he shouldn't miss.
Yeah, and
he agreed.
It really was. And this is, again, just 2 years after it came out. This is issue 25, which always a nice big anniversary type issue is either 2 years of 24 or the 25th issue. It's not bannered that way, but bringing Hawkman into the fold at this time sure made it feel like an epic story that was being told for issue 25.
Yeah, yes, worthy of a milestone like that. Yes, I absolutely agree. That was JSA was at that time the all syrup squishy of superhero comics.
Yeah.
So much unadulterated fanish goodness. And so many different characters to play with, so much history to draw upon, both recent and distant.
And as much as I love JLA, and the JLA series at this time was great too, don't get me wrong, they really dealt with the outworldly, fantastical side of superheroing. These guys did that to a certain extent, but still were grounded in what was important: family, closeness, life, making sure that the people they knew and cared for were protected, as well as all the innocents here on Earth. Even when they had to do something fantastical out on Thanagar, in this case, they still were grounded on their place on Earth, training the heroes to come and the children of those heroes to bring them all into this grandiose world. It was really fantastic.
That was the series that really brought the concept of the legacy hero
Oh,
its
yeah.
own. It had existed for a couple of decades by then, like in Infinity Inc. you might think of, but it was, that series had a fan following, but JSA really broke it through into superstardom.
Yeah, and I dare say at times JSA did a lot better job of reaching readers than JLA did at times.
I agree with that too.
Especially after JLA hit the World War III type time frame. And Grant Morrison was done with his run, and the people to come. There were good stories to be told. Who came after him?
Joe Kelly.
Joe Kelly, and then
Mark Waid.
Mark Waid, with Tower of Babel and stuff like that. But JSA really they never slowed down. It was fantastic from the start.
Yeah, it was true. JLA did kind of become a creator revolving door after
It did.
enough years.
It did.
Yeah, but JSA remained pretty constant until almost right up to the end.
Yeah.
I hate to admit that there were a few issues of the original series that I did not even buy, but as of 2001, it was the DC title to read.
Yep. And this goes under my fold of JLA-related titles of the larger collection that I just, as I dwindle down things and get rid of things that I probably won't read again or have them digitally now, whatever the case may be, this is one of those things that will just never leave my purview. It will always be part of my collection.
Well said. Yeah, kind of makes me wish we were still doing our series of footnotes episodes about JSA, because there's
plenty more to talk about.
So many fine details to gush over.
Yeah.
All right, now let's set our heading for the Marvel Universe for a little bit.
Okay.
And to the nebulous past of the Marvel Universe, to the, ever more imperfectly defined past. Because, they do the rolling reset thing in the Marvel Universe. You're never sure exactly how long ago certain events happened. But this particular story I'm about to talk about is one of those that sort of defies the passage of time. And anything that so blithely penetrates the time barrier deserves a spot on this podcast. What I'm talking about here will become a little less murky in a moment, but it's going to be a Daredevil comic. And I have here the first issue of Daredevil Yellow,
Okay.
6-issue miniseries, number 1, also from August of 2001, written by Jeff Loeb, art by his frequent partner Tim Sale.
And they were doing a bunch of these from Marvel at that time.
That is right. This is actually the first.
Okay.
This began that cycle of color miniseries that they were doing. They began with Daredevil Yellow, and then that was followed by Spider-Man Blue and Hulk Gray, and Captain America White was something of a non-starter. I think they only got like one issue of like the 0 issue published, and then the wheels fell off the whole thing for whatever reason. To this day, I'm not really sure why that never got going.
I was always disappointed in that. I followed them ever since they did the Batman Legends of the Dark Knight and Long Halloween things in the DC universe.
Yeah. Fantastic stuff, which I also read and love. It takes a lot for me to make an exception to my usual put it through the pile rule, and just to pick it up and devour it right away. But for the Long Halloween and Dark Victory, which was not as good as Long Halloween, but still.
No, but still good.
Yeah. So I just made it a point to, late Saturday night, I would just kind of darken my bedroom. And because I was still in high school when those series were coming out, those 2 maxi series, and I would just I had an armchair and an old reading lamp that had belonged to my great-grandmother years ago, and I just turned that on, and in that darkened room with that single light source, I would read those things. And I remember especially the Thanksgiving-themed issue with Solomon Grundy, the end of which all those people ended up dead. that was really chilling. That was the right atmosphere for reading that, and so it's good and noirish stuff. Tim Sale's artwork is about as close to adapting the look and feel of classic film noir to the paneled page as has ever been achieved, and that's as true of the moodiness of these color-themed miniseries. I mean, the color is. The colors, I should mention, Matt Hollingsworth is the name of the artist who provides the color for Daredevil Yellow #1. And the title color does play an important and prominent role, or occupy a prominent place in the palette employed by the colorist in these series. It's symbolic in that way. I think the idea here is that it's supposed to be kind of like the colored periods of certain artists' careers, like Pablo Picasso's famous blue period. It's supposed to be evocative of, that period in the artist's development, his emotional state at that time. And it's kind of the same thing here, except instead of evoking what was going through Jeff Loeb or Tim Sale's mind, it's supposed to be symbolic of what's happening in the life of the title superhero.
Okay.
So Daredevil Yellow, I mean, the color yellow, having been paying attention to DC Comics for the last several years, we know that yellow is associated with fear, and Daredevil is the man without fear.
Yeah.
So you could see this as, but it also makes more literal reference to the costume that Daredevil wore during the early years of his career, because when he first appeared in 1964, he was wearing a yellow suit. With accents of black and red, as opposed to the all red, sort of vermilion long johns that we're familiar with. And that suit does make an appearance too in the first issue of Daredevil Yellow. There is a brief framing sequence where we see Daredevil in his modern day, or what would have been modern day as of 2001, red suit, flipping and vaulting and monologizing. The narrative device here, the conceit is that he's his first-person narration of the story is a letter that he's writing to Karen Page.
Okay.
It begins, "Dear Karen, I'm afraid." Those are the only words of dialogue that appear on the first page of the story. You just see Daredevil, extreme close-up of his head, his hands up in front of it as he's leaping from one building ledge to another, and the famous "Here Comes Daredevil" logo, as it would have appeared in 1964. And the whole thing's dedicated to Stan Lee and Bill Everett and Wally Wood. And that's still... the Daredevil Netflix series says it's based on the comics by Stan Lee and Bill Everett, too, which always kind of causes me to scratch my head a bit, because Bill Everett didn't do more than draw the first issue, and I don't think he even quite got that entire thing done himself either. I think he needed an artist. So, I don't know, I think it would be better to dedicate it to Stan Lee and Wally Wood and, like Bill Everett or Bob Powell, and there's other people who in the early years contributed more than just that first issue to Daredevil. But, at least they extended it to Wally Wood as well. So, anyway, the important thing to note here is that Daredevil is in kind of a reflective place here. As of 2001, Karen Page was no longer among the living.
Yep.
I hope that doesn't spoil anything for anyone, but too bad. It's done. It's out there. She died in issue number 5 of Kevin Smith's Marvel Knights run on Daredevil.
That is one of the few issues that I have actually cried at when I first read it.
Really?
Absolutely.
Well.
Yep. I can remember sitting in our house. I was sitting in a particular chair that used to be in the living room, and I'm reading that issue, and I just teared. It was heart-wrenching. And I think that's the issue at the end. There was a letter that Daredevil read then that he found about her death.
That he found, okay. Yeah, well, this is one, the letter that makes the narrative spine of this. It's one that he wrote. It's more like a therapeutic exercise. He says in here that Foggy urged him to do this just to get his thoughts out on paper and get his emotions straightened out.
Sure.
So he's still reeling from the events of that issue, which had a strong impact on you here in this universe. So imagine what was going through his head on Earth 616, because she died as a result of the Guardian Devil storyline. Daredevil Yellow doesn't go into too many details. It lets us know that she's dead and that Matt Murdock is trying to sort through his feelings on that subject. And it's kind of a Wizard of Oz moment in that all the colors are kind of black and white and muted. Even the red of his costume is sort of pale and washed out as he swings around town and somehow finds, sort of subconsciously, finds his way back to his father's old training hangout, Fogwell's gym. And he sees an old poster, an old fight promotion poster for his dad. And since the senses are a direct link to memory, and Daredevil's senses are more acute than anyone else's on Earth just about, he is immediately sent off on this reverie that makes up the story of the rest of the miniseries, pretty much. As we're immediately catapulted back in time through his recollection to whatever time period it was when Matt Murdock was just at the end of his time in law school. His dad is still alive. He's a prize fighter. He's been enjoying kind of a career renaissance thanks to the influence of a fight promoter named Roscoe Sweeney, alias The Fixer, which should set off some warning bells right there.
Yeah, right.
And Matt Murdock even says that, a fight manager named The Fixer and my dad over the hill at 40 kept winning. I can't imagine which one of us was more blind.
Yeah.
One of the neat little turns of phrase that Jeff Loeb works into this script of his. And to get back to Tim Sale's artwork for just a minute, I said that the artwork is kind of timeless. By that I mean that just his design choices, the way the people's apparel, the architecture, the technology, it's not too dated, quote unquote. It's not nailed down to any particular time period. So it's sort of time transcendent. It's timeless. So it could be happening, whatever would have been the appropriate number of years ago from 2001. Could have been like 1990 or something. Or like 1993, like 8 years earlier. Or it could have been 1964, which is, of course, when Daredevil's first appearance actually happened. Could even have been 1944, which is what is appropriate to the noir atmosphere that Tim Sale, so well infuses into so many of the things that he draws. So just looking at the way the characters are dressed, Foggy's got his trademark bow tie on, Foggy Nelson does. Some of the girls in this bar where Foggy and Matt's dad, battling Jack Murdock, are having dinner and drinks together. They're hanging out at the bar, and they could have stepped right out of an episode of Mad Men. So it's just building this period, but not really atmosphere. Yeah. So to allow the longtime fans to believe in their heart of hearts that all of this really did happen in 1964, there's nothing in the artwork to say them nay as far as that goes. And so there's not a whole lot of plot going on here. And really, one of the main points I have in my notes here about this is that it's just a brief retelling of the events leading up to the death of battling Jack Murdock. He was instructed to throw a fight by the Fixer. He refused in the end. His pride got the better of him.
Sure.
He ended up getting killed for it. And so that's the death of battling Jack Murdock. He was subsequently failed by the court system. Then Matt Murdock graduates from law school, and almost immediately he knows what he's going to do. And so we see the death of battling Jack and the birth of Daredevil. And the story doesn't at any point flash back to or barely even mention the origin of Daredevil's powers. It's more concerned with the origin of Daredevil, the identity. As the story, we don't see any panels replaying the car accident and the toxic chemicals that ended up giving young Matt Murdock his powers, blinding him and giving him the super senses. That's not even gotten into. As far as we know, Matt Murdock is just a blind law school student who just happens to have incredibly acute other senses. And that's all you really need to know because, as I said, this is not about the origin of the powers, it's about the origins of the identity. And I think that's actually a good way for Jeff Loeb to have gone about this. Yeah, Loeb, as a writer, I've always been very hot and cold about Jeff Loeb because he's turned in some of the strongest and also some of the weakest superhero comics scripts that I've ever read. Mm-hmm. But this is definitely in the former category. He holds up his end of the bargain admirably here. You know, he's got some excellent heartfelt dialogue. You really feel what Matt Murdock is feeling as he takes this rather painful hobble down memory lane just to try to protect himself from the even more painful and fresher emotional wounds he's suffering in the present day. But it's still, it's recognizably a retelling of the Silver Age origin of Daredevil, and as such, it's not too painful and too gritty and grueling the way, say, a Frank Miller version of the same events would have been.
Okay.
But he's got some nice turns of phrase in here, some good sensory imagery, which is crucial to a good Daredevil story, since heightened senses are his power set.
Yeah.
And the artwork by Tim Sale. I mean, I've already said, just his use of light and shadow, and I think we have to give credit to Matt Hollingsworth for his watercolor-like colors, which, this being, as I've said, it's very color-oriented, so the palette is of the utmost importance. But what it all adds up to here is that, the plot is here, but it's well known to most readers of Marvel Comics anyway. The characters are here, also well known. But this is that rare story, going back to the elements of literature that I've known and have been that I've clung to ever since I was a high school student. You've got your plot, character, setting, theme, and style. And this is that rare story where all of the other elements of literature take a distant backseat to style. As I've said, the plot is out there, we know it, the characters are here, and they're all behaving as they should be. But really the most important thing is not so much those elements of the story as the way in which the story is told and what it makes you feel as you read it. And that is brought across really more by the artwork than it is by the words. Although, as I've said, Jeff Loeb does a really fine job of holding up his end of the bargain as writer. It's a great stroll through Daredevil's origins, both textually and extra-textually, because it evokes the 1964 era. And I love that time in comics, and it gives it kind of a noir edge to it, so that makes it feel like, as I've said earlier, it could even be taking place in 1944. It's kind of like 2001 remembers 1964, remembering 1944. And the result is very effective. It's moody. And it does make you feel. It makes you feel right along with Matt Murdock as he makes these decisions. Even gives you a couple of extra details into his past, because it shows you finding his dad's old locker room robe, yellow and black, his lucky colors, and it shows Matt sewing together his first costume from that. Okay. So that's kind of why he went in the direction of yellow. And more symbolically, you could say that this is him working his way through his whatever fear he may have left. Yeah. Just wearing it on the outside instead of letting it penetrate inside. And once he's expurgated it completely, he can move on to the red.
Now, that was a few-issue miniseries?
It was 6 issues.
6, wow, okay. I know I have them all. I've never read them. I never got to... I bought the first issue. I know I looked through it. Know it was beautifully drawn and colored, but I just never sat down to read it. Mm-hmm. And I almost picked it just for that reason. Mm-hmm.
Well, I'll tell you what, Shane, this is an excellent time. And I was going to say this anyway to you and anyone else who happens to be listening right now. This is a great time to revisit, or visit for the first time, this particular miniseries. And for one key reason, because of the Daredevil Netflix series, which is out there right now. Because that's showing us kind of the same sequence of events, so how the rise of Daredevil, how Matt Murdock became a vigilante in the first place. But it's showing it through more of a Miller-esque lens.
Sure.
This is, the tone is not too different, but it is markedly different. And it's, as I said before, it's darker than your typical Silver Age storytelling, but it's kind of it's painting kind of a noirish film of smugginess over that Silver Age gleam and glisten. And so it is more the Stan Lee and Bill Everett, Wally Wood, Gene Colan approach to Daredevil's origin than it is the Miller approach. But there's there's kind of like a common strand of creative DNA in both of them, in that Jeff Loeb is an executive producer on the Daredevil Netflix series, as he is for just about everything Marvel's doing for DC, for TV these days. And you'd have to think that he might have put a few bugs in the ears of the people writing the scripts for the episodes. Because one thing that they have in common, I noticed right away, is you remember how in the first episode of the Daredevil Netflix series, Battle and Jack has a fight with Crusher Creel.
Yeah.
Guess where that idea came from? This issue. We actually see him fighting the bald-headed, pre-absorbing powers Crusher Creel.
Nice.
So that's an example of Jeff Loeb's influence on that. So it'll make for a fun and, I think, productive compare and contrast to take a look at these two kind of divergent 21st century revisitations of Daredevil's origin.
Yeah.
So now is a perfect excuse, if, like Shane, you haven't tried Daredevil Yellow yet, get out there and do it, and use it as a companion piece to the first couple episodes of Netflix Daredevil.
Yeah, that would be interesting.
See, it's just one of those interesting little synchronicities that pop up here on the Time Bubble all the time.
All right, so my Marvel pick for this time period,
Bringing it out of the cargo hold,
is The Amazing Spider-Man number 32. It's kind of right in the middle of a story arc where Spider-Man finds somebody else with his kind of powers. And this guy named Ezekiel kind of explains to Peter about the totems that have been around the world for almost all of creation, different people having different powers all throughout history, and Peter's just the most recent to receive these. It's not that the spider bit him and he accidentally got powers, more that he was destined to have this totem of the spider powers going through him. There's a couple things about this. It's written by J. Michael Straczynski, which was a pretty big deal for me, going from watching Babylon 5, which I did not start to do right away. I watched it all in reruns. And I think even after I met Jamie and he talked about Babylon 5, did I even get interested in it enough to watch it. And then seeing J. Michael Straczynski move to comics in this fashion, it's drawn by John Romita Jr., which certainly didn't hurt at all. The covers at this time were done by J. Scott Campbell, one of my guilty pleasure artists. So there's some unabashedly loving adornment to me just by the covers alone. And J. Scott Campbell did quite a few covers in this time period. This era of Spider-Man features a big round circle in the upper left-hand corner instead of the rectangular square Marvel tag that had been there for so long. It's bannered Marvel Comics across the top, and there's a Spider-Man in a big circle in the upper left-hand corner. And it not only says, with an inside of an M, the approved for comics by the Comics Authority type thing that's always on comics up to a certain point.
They hadn't abolished the code just
Exactly.
yet.
It also says issue number 32, which is true. This is after the, Heroes Reborn, Return type thing, when they restarted everything.
Well, in Spider-Man's case, it was more the Spider-Man Chapter 1.
Okay.
That was their excuse.
That was done by Byrne.
Right.
Right? Okay. Underneath the 32 is the number 473. So this is after they started renumbering things enough to put it on there, but still holding that more current number 32 thing, which kind of got confusing after a while to me and was redundant. So I was glad they moved back to one or the other.
Now they just give you a new number 1 every 6 months.
Yeah, which drives me nuts.
Me too.
So this issue starts out with kind of a day in the life of Peter Parker. It's at night. There's criminals abound, kidnapping somebody, trying to escape from somewhere, and he just jumps in and saves the day, as he so often does, and leaves the bad guy, just your average, everyday, thuggy type kid, tied up with webbing. At one point, he does do his normal little funny quibs, and he says, so this is going to be quick. Which would you prefer, to be unconscious or insulted? Pick one. And the guy's like, and he's like, good choice. And he, of course, is then strung up with loser written out in webbing underneath him. So he's certainly embarrassed, and the cops find him. And then we cut to Peter in the old high school he went to as a kid, but only now he's a chemistry professor at the school. Something new for him, and it was at a time when Peter's life was starting to calm back down. He was Spider-Man, but he was also now finding a niche being this teacher for high school and doing some interesting things in his life that weren't crazy. Peter's life's always crazy in some fashion. And while we all think he's calming down, and on the blackboard it's Mr. Parker Science 201, and some chemical bonds written out and little tags of the human genome, 30,000 genes, 30 billion pairs, blah, 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 which is fine. His principal catches him in the hallway and calls him to his office, kind of congratulating Peter. And Peter's kind of wondering why. And here Ezekiel, who has shown up a few issues by now, kind of trying to get Peter Parker to realize his place in the universe. And it's not, like I said before, it's not that the spider just bit him and he accidentally got powers. It's more of, hey, you're the next person to have the totem of the spider and his powers. And Ezekiel, who has these powers also, you don't really see them, I don't think, much in this issue, if I remember right from just reading it the other day. But he donates a certain amount of money to the school to buy new science equipment and gets in the good graces of the principal. But really what he's doing is kind of checking in on Peter Parker and letting Peter know that he has tabs on him everywhere. And Peter's not necessarily happy about that.
Nor would you or I if we were in his
not
position.
at all. Kind of annoyed and a little bit unsure of what he's trying to tell him. So Ezekiel says, Peter says, well, can I have a word with you, Ezekiel, after all the congratulatory things from the principal? Say, oh, good job. Here we have all this money. Tut, tut. Oh, isn't that lovely? Ezekiel takes Peter for lunch, and they go to a pizza place, and they're discussing all of this about the totem and his powers and what they mean at this time and what Peter could do with them if he just kind of learned how to use them properly. And Ezekiel says, well, why don't you go talk to that spider over there on that table? And Peter kind of very jokingly goes over to the spider and says, so, how's it going? Eat any good flies today? And, of course, the spider doesn't reply with anything. And Peter's like, see, nothing happens. And Ezekiel's like, well, it's not exactly what I meant, but you can do more. And he starts to explain the history of the totems of different animals throughout history.
Yeah, see, this is kind of like what I was talking about with Hawkman and the animal avatars. Didn't work very well with Hawkman, and in my opinion, didn't work all that well with Spider-Man. But go on.
No, at the time, it was interesting when Ezekiel came onto the forefront of Spider-Man comics. It was just interesting because someone who kind of was drawn to look a little bit like Peter, in my opinion, as I was reading it, had these powers. So, the first issue or two that he was in, I was kind of wondering, well, is he related? Is this alternate universe? Is there something else going on that we don't know about? And none of that's really the case. It really is just somebody who has these powers at this time. I do think his story gets fleshed out much later, and I'm a little bit forgetful of what happens with Ezekiel later. He does not turn out to be the nicest person in the world, I don't think. Kind of chasing down Peter, if I remember correctly. But at this point, he's more taking the stance to try and be his mentor, to teach him how to broaden his power set and his skill set to be the spider, not necessarily Spider-Man. He makes reference to Captain America and some of his foes who have had totems, and Magneto, Thor and Loki's adversaries, marking that those villains to their heroes are not in the same vein as what Spider-Man's villains have come out. They're all bad people doing horrific things to Captain America, to the X-Men, to Thor. However, in Spider-Man's case, it's more of these totem people. It's Doc Ock, it's the Vulture, the Rhino, Scorpion, the Lizard, all very animal-heavy things. And while their totems are not full totems like Peter's is, they are still there, and they're the kind of villains that Peter battles, not these other just men with powers that are doing horrific things. This is more naturalistic, more ethereal battles of animal-named villains, and Peter Parker as the Spider. It was an interesting thing I forgot about, how he explained to Peter what he thought his skill set or mindset should be in battling these villains. And there's just this tiny little bit, because Ezekiel's built up this multi-million or billion-dollar company and has influences and people all over the world that can track and do things like get in touch with Peter Parker and donate millions of dollars, or in this issue, $100,000, I think it was, to the school. And you just get a little bit of a glimpse into Ezekiel's past as he's coming through a jungle to a pyramid sanctuary type place. And you don't really learn more about it other than his receivership of his said totem is nowhere near as easygoing as Peter's. He went through much more rigorous way of getting his powers than what Peter did. And to the reader, you just get a little glimpse of, well, maybe his what he's trying to do to Peter isn't as benevolent as what you might think. But Peter doesn't know that. He's sitting there over eating a piece of pizza with him, just talking about what could be. And then Ezekiel does explain how there is someone out there trying to kill off the totems. All these years, whatever person receives the totem, this grand, evil, vampiric-looking person is chasing after them, trying to do away with them.
And that would be Morlun.
Is that Morlun? I don't know that they mentioned his name in this issue, and I didn't look it up. I should have.
Now, that is the guy who just recently has been the big bad in the Spider-Verse.
Oh, see, now I did not read Spider-Verse yet. I'm very behind on that. As Ezekiel's explaining this to Peter, he's also pays for lunch. They kind of go back to the headquarters of Ezekiel's office, and all the while, kind of Ezekiel getting to the point of this issue, at least, in trying to protect Peter and what Ezekiel has done. And he explains, not knowing that he's searching for Peter specifically until recently, he was building something in this office building to protect whoever had the totem that he needed to protect. And he built this almost impenetrable room that somebody should just be secured and safeguarded in, so that Morlun never gets to him and kills off the current totem. And Ezekiel's trying to turn the tides, do something that's never been done before, protect one of these totems and safeguard them. And while Peter's impressed with the work, and it's a very elaborate room, it's very technology heavy, it looks like something Peter would be very comfortable in. Peter kind of rolls his eyes a little bit, in my opinion, and says, nah, you know what, I'm really not going to hide. This really isn't my thing. I'm Spider-Man. I protect people in New York. I'm now a teacher. I enjoy it. I'm not going to just hide away in here until you tell me I'm ready to come back out.
He's got greater responsibilities than ever.
Yeah, going back to that whole with great power comes great responsibility thing that's so well ingrained in Peter from his past. And much to Ezekiel's kind of chagrin, he turns down Ezekiel and Peter Parker leaves. And one of the last panels Ezekiel's in, it says, okay, goodbye, Peter. It's all that good night, Ezekiel. Goodbye, Peter. And kind of says his, okay, well, I tried, but now I have to probably figure out another way to approach this because what I wanted to do isn't going to happen. Giving a little bit of a hint behind some more malicious intent behind Ezekiel's thoughts in the end. And the last thing we see is, there they do say Morlun on the very last page. I forgot about that. One of Morlun's lackeys comes down and says, is there anything you need? You've been pretty quiet since you've been back. And nope, not anymore. I'm ready. He's ready to go out and get the new totem, Peter Parker. And the last three panels are Peter sitting, having a snack, watching TV. A report comes in of some crime happening, and out the window Peter goes to save the day in his grand Spider-Man tradition. I'm sorry, not the last three panels. The next panel is the big tragedy happening, a building on fire. Peter runs in to, of course, save some people and is interrupted by Morlun coming to announce himself to get Peter Parker.
Walking right through the flames to get to his meal.
Yep. I was misled in my telling by the last ad that cut away, forgetting about those last 2 pages. And that's where the story ends. Peter's getting thrown by Morlun into a car as he announces himself to Peter. And, reading that kind of gives me a little bit, like I want to do with so many things, go back and reread. I have all of this time period Spider-Mans, partially because of J. Michael Straczynski writing them, partially because of the Ezekiel storyline that I did enjoy. But selfishly, not selfishly, kind of what is it? Guilty pleasure is because all the J. Scott Campbell covers. So they're in my J. Scott Campbell section of my collection.
Is that? Oh, okay. I didn't know you had your collection organized by creator.
I don't normally. I have my DC books in alphabetical order. I have Marvel books in alphabetical order. I don't have them together in alphabetical order across the board because I have so few Marvel comics that I have kept now that they only really take up 2 or 3 short boxes is really what I'm down to. I have way more books on my iPad than I do actual Marvel comics now. And then all the DC stuff's in order. But I had so many things that J. Scott Campbell has done, whether it be Danger Girl or covers for certain books, that I just have a short box. Half of it's dedicated to just stuff he's done. And I threw the Peter Parker Spider-Man stuff in there since I don't have a large Marvel collection anymore.
So you've just created a sort of special wing.
Yeah, little subsection.
Well, yeah, there's as little of it as you say you have. Yeah. It makes sense to concentrate it and put it off to one side.
Yeah, I mean, at my height, maybe I don't know that I've said this lately on the regular Comic Geek Speak show, but at my height, I had about 10,000 books, and I've dwindled that down dramatically to very little now. It's really just my Justice League collection, some favorite Marvel stuff, and everything else just rotates in and out anymore, and that's perfectly fine. Yeah. Evolution of my collection.
Yeah. Well, I really didn't read very much of JMS's Amazing Spider-Man run, but I have number 30. I know that.
Okay.
That was the first issue that he wrote, and it too had a J. Scott Campbell cover.
Sure.
And I know I talked about it on the Time Bubble not too long ago. That was some of the setup for all this. It was the first time that Ezekiel showed up and played a couple of little mind games with Peter, just asking him some. Just adopting the Socratic method and asking him some questions about the things that he'd always thought or assumed about his powers, just starting to just gradually break to him the revelation that he might be a totem bearer.
Yeah.
And also Moreland shows up for the first time. He makes his arrival in New York kind of the same way Dracula did, in the hold of a ship.
Okay.
Well, the way Dracula arrived in London, I should say, in Bram Stoker's novel. And he leaving behind a bunch of superhuman corpses in the hold, which had been his provisions for the trip.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's where we're introduced to Ezekiel and Moreland, the two major the representative figures of JMS's run.
I don't know how well the whole story holds up now. Back then, it was exciting not only to see J. Michael Straczynski and John Romita Jr. do Spider-Man. It was an interesting take on Spider-Man, really something that I think hadn't been done before.
Well, that's true.
And I was really curious and hopeful that it would be this mentor-type student relationship
Which is exactly what Peter hadn't had in his life.
Exactly.
And what he could have used as Spider-Man in particular. Yeah. He'd had a couple of different mentors as Peter, most of whom either died or turned into supervillains.
And he had Madam Web for a while there, too, which always seemed a little bit kind of neutral anyway, because you couldn't really tell what she wanted or would do. She would help him sometimes, but sometimes would end up hurting him, I think, in a lot of ways. Not necessarily meaning to, but her vision was what she had, not necessarily what was best for Peter, I don't think, at all times. I could be wrong on that, but that's kind of how I envision her. So this was something that interested me, and I was hoping would have lasted a little bit longer than it did. And I remember, just like so many events or big changes, shakeups to characters, that by the end of it I was disappointed till I got done reading it, and I'm like, oh, okay, well, that didn't work the way I wanted it to. But it still was a pretty good read up to that point, and enough so that I wanted to revisit it, even if it was just for this episode. It was a fun time to read Spider-Man, I thought. Trying something new. Oh, it was definitely something new, something dramatically different. And, it definitely was something that hadn't been tried with the character before. But as I said earlier, I think introducing a mentor figure for Spider-Man, like a daddy longlegs, if you will, was a good idea. But trying to force graft this whole mystic background to his powers to him wasn't much less so. Yeah. And I know that I'm not the only one who felt that way at the time. And I like the idea of it to make him think outside the box about his powers, but I didn't necessarily like the actuality or the reality of it in the story itself, the way it played out.
Yeah, challenging his assumptions about his powers, it's just good science.
Yeah.
And Peter Parker's always been a scientist. So that much was good, but then turning around and saying, oh, hey, you're actually the incarnation of a mystic spider totem.
Yeah, and look out, this guy's going to kill you because he kills all the totems.
Yeah,
Okay.
the radioactive spider was a better assumption to stick with.
Yeah. Yep. Okay.
So anyway, are we ready to catch a falling star?
We are.
All right.
I was quite excited for this.
Oh, I'm glad. I knew this was an issue that you must have read and savored
Oh, yeah.
at the time.
And it was a fun issue to revisit. I mean, I've tried to reread the series, and I will get through it again one day. I've gotten as far as the 3rd volume of the Omnibus, and then something always distracts me, and I put it down, and then I go back, and to do it justice, I start over and try to get through it again, and I get so far and put it down. Just the life gets in the way.
Yeah, it does every time. Let's start with the cover,
Okay.
because it's a little out of the ordinary as Starman covers goes.
It is.
So many of them were these like turbid swirls of darker shade, like ochres and oranges and deep
Yeah.
blues and greens and blacks in the shades case. But this one is just stark white.
Yep.
And there's a bit of a Starman symbol there, almost like a compass rose. Right? And there's Jack standing there with his boy Teddy.
Yep.
As they're wearing one of his trademark like bowling shirts,
I love those bowling shirts.
grinning out at the reader. As they're just standing there, being happy, enjoying life. It's all the clutter and confusion of his life, and Opal has come to an end, and he's ready to chart a new course and start with a blank slate out in San Francisco, which is where the issue ends.
Yeah. And this is Starman number 80
Oh, yeah, we should mention that. This is Starman number 80.
from August of 2001.
And it is the last issue of the long-running fan favorite Starman series.
Yeah.
Has been had such an impact on Shane and myself both as readers of comics, showing us new things that superhero series could do.
Oh, yeah.
James Robinson did take a number of chances, and he's been grateful to DC for being allowed so much leeway to do it in the course of an 80-issue series. And this last issue, they continued to be good to James Robinson unto the end. Robinson, of course, wrote this issue as he did all 79 others, plus a couple of annuals thrown in, and a million issue,
Sure.
the DC 1 million. But DC gave him rather an unusual page count for this. I'm going to have to flip through and count over again, but I think it's like 56 pages,
Huh.
Counting all the ads and everything. There's
Yeah.
And the story, how many... they are numbered. There are 38 pages of story, which is not exactly a standard length issue for a comic of the time.
No.
But they gave him exactly as much space as he felt he needed to tell this last story he had. They slapped a $3.95 cover price on it.
Which
so
back then that was pretty pricey.
it was, but it's still, that's more like the average cover price for a 32-page comic nowadays.
Yeah.
And just think of how much more you're getting for this and how much better the quality, too.
Oh, yeah. Oh, gosh, yeah.
Because there aren't too many James Robinson Starmans on the shelves these days.
No, not at all.
I don't think anything else really compares. There are other things that might be as good, but in a very different way. There's never been quite this flavor in comics before or since.
Yeah, James Robinson wrote it. Peter Snyder. Is that how you say that? I always wrestle with that.
It's definitely Snibe, that much. Beyond that, it's either Snybjerg or Snyberg or...
Okay.
Yeah, it's Snybjerg, which is what you said. I've always said Snybjerg.
Okay.
I'm sorry, I just blocked my microphone. Snybjerg. He's Danish, and I don't know much about Danish phonology, but
Yeah.
I do know that when you see those J's in some of the like northern Scandinavian languages, you just pretend that they're I's.
Okay.
So it would be Snybjerg.
And he did the artwork. Oakley, again, I don't have first names on this page, did the lettering.
Let me take Bill Oakley.
Bill
I just
Oakley?
had to look at the thank yous and acknowledgments section on the letters page.
Good call.
2 pages worth of prose from James Robinson expressing his gratitude and just disbelief that he was lucky enough to be able to produce a story of this scope over such a long period of time.
And in an odd thing, I did reread all those thank yous in the back, which I normally don't do, especially if I've read through them once in my life. But Starman holds something different for me. It's almost as if there was one thing comic book related that I could grab out of the house and lose everything else. This would be it. And that's saying something for my love of JLA and the certain amount of issues and story arcs that I absolutely love through JLA. This just holds something more special to me in all its grandiose storytelling. I love his nod to Archie Goodwin, the guiding light in the front page, and he makes comment of it in that special thanks section in the back.
He says he's grateful that that Goodwin's name was able to appear in the credit boxes of every single issue, even long after he had passed away.
Yeah, it's just fantastic. All right.
Greg Wright did the coloring.
Okay.
And I recognize that name because he's worked as both colorist and writer. And I was a little surprised to learn this. Robinson, again, in that his essay at the back, his thank you list, he mentions that Greg Wright colored not all, but most of the issues of this. I didn't even know he had colored a single one. I know him from his Marvel work. He had done, he wrote and colored a lot of the Silver Sable and the Wild Pack series.
Okay.
He did some Cosmic Powers stuff in the 90s for Marvel, and apparently he just jumped ship to DC along about 94, and he was the colorist of record on most of the Starman series. Who knew?
And Peter Snybjerg was the artist for a good chunk of the last half of the book, and Tony Harris did a chunk in the beginning.
So like 45, I think.
It's really impressive to have this kind of a team, a creative team, stick together in this way, to not only have a writer go the whole distance to tell his entire story, but to have two artists like this work phenomenally. And Tony Harris continued to do covers for the book well after he was done main artwork duties in the book.
In fact, he did the cover for this one with some help from his former studio mate, Andrew Robinson.
Yeah.
Oh, and Steve Wacker, later known as Mr. 52. He was the assistant editor for this issue under Peter Tomasi.
Just an impressive lineup of creators.
Oh, and right there on the first page, if there were ever any doubt whether or not this should be discussed on the Time Bubble.
Yeah, very true.
We see Jack Knight and the future Starman, formerly Starboy of the Legion of Superheroes, Tom Callor, puttering in a Legion Time Bubble, bringing Jack back from his adventures, his emotionally exhausting time in the year 1951.
Yeah, his last great adventure.
Right, helping his dad get his nerve back to become Starman again, and seeing...
I'm sorry, I should say his last great adventure as Starman.
True, because in this issue, well said, Shane, he's going to start off on a whole new adventure.
Yeah.
Of fatherhood. And then, of course, this getting to spend a little extra time with his brother David.
Yeah.
Back in 1951. But here, in this story entitled Arrivederci, Bon Voyage, Goodbye, he gets to get in touch with his future for a little bit, as the character who will eventually, one of several characters who will eventually, in the future, assume the mantle of Starman and carry on this legacy that James Robinson has almost single-handedly constructed around the character. I mean, prior to James Robinson coming along, we had David Knight popped up in a couple issues of the Roger Stern written the early '90s Starman. But I guess it was James Robinson that really took all the different disparate versions of the character and forged them into a single cohesive bloodline of sorts or legacy.
Yeah.
The character. And here we get to see a lot of the past, because that's been times past has been the major abiding theme of Starman from the beginning. But there's also got to be room for the future, and I'm kind of glad that James Robinson gets that out of the way at the beginning. Conversation with Starboy / Man and Jack Knight. It gets a little bit confusing for us and for Jack, because as Tom Callor tries to explain alternate futures to Jack, and Jack's not quite comprehending what's being said to him.
Yeah, which kind of he shouldn't be. I mean, that's all stuff to come yet. It probably is going to stay that way, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's fluid.
And then once he's bid farewell to the future, as Starman goes off back to the 30th century, knowing that in his personal timeline, he's lived his life in the 30th century, he's lived his life in the 21st century as Starman, and now he's about to go back and die.
Yeah.
The next day.
Now, Jack goes back to his store. For the life of me, I'm drawing a blank. What was his store called?
Knight's Past. Exactly.
It wasn't as bad as I thought.
Memory has served you well.
Love that story. He arrives and he finds a letter from Sadie explaining how much she loves him. Very touching. Nice way to start this final issue. Helps him decide what he wants to do and progress his way forward through the story.
Yep. And, well, I guess once again... So there's kind of an allegorical ring then to his discussion with Tom Callor then, because past and future colliding. Now he finds himself in a position where he needs to make a choice between past and future.
Yeah.
And he's been so focused on the past in a couple of different ways in the course of the series, and he's been running an antiques and collectibles store for crying out loud.
Oh yeah.
But now. He's got Opal City, which he loves and treasures, and which represents his past to date, his memories of his father and family. But on the other hand, he's got Sadie Falk waiting for him on the other side of the country. So does he stay and continue to cultivate his connection to his past, or does he branch out and embrace his future?
And in this letter, she announces that she is pregnant with his soon-to-be daughter.
Mm-hmm. So he'll have not just one... Well, little night bastard running around, but two.
Yeah.
Yep, and I'm glad that James Robinson doesn't waste a lot of time with hand-wringing and soul-searching. He gives us one 9-paneled page, page 7, as Jack. Again, the subtleties of Greg Wright's coloring here. We just see as the light changes, as we can see that he's been standing on the sidewalk outside his store for hours, just reading and rereading the letter and thinking. And finally, it's nighttime.
Yep.
Bump. And he just, at the bottom of the page, he decides that the decision is not a hard one to make after all, and he just sets about saying his goodbyes and, just laying down the next stone in the legacy trail.
And then, from that point on, he says, I guess I have some goodbyes to make and a cosmic rod to pass on. Mm-hmm. And from that point on, we visit almost every single character that has been involved in this series throughout the entire course of it.
Oh, yes.
It's such a fantastic, grand, proper way to say goodbye to all these characters and everything that they have meant to Jack, and not only to Jack, then to us, the reader, going through this incredible journey through these 80 issues.
Yeah, the only other series I can think of, Shane, and I think you'll see the truth of my words eventually, that has done as good a job as Robinson and company have done of just establishing this big extended cast of characters and keeping them around, revisiting them, refreshing them, and then tying off the loose ends at the end. The only other series I know of that did as good a job of that as this is Neil Gaiman's Sandman.
Oh, nice.
So this issue, number 80, is kind of like what Sandman number 75, The Tempest, was to that
Excellent.
series, as we touch base on a number of the characters and concepts introduced throughout that series' run.
And just a little sidebar, I'm enjoying that ride through Sandman that we do on that other show in the Book of the Month Club stuff very much.
I'm glad you are, Shane. Your
and it
perspective
rings,
there has been, as a first-timer, has been very valuable to the
rings
discussions.
very true with what I remember reading Starman for the first time also.
Well, there have been a number of people who have said that Starman probably should have been a Vertigo series to begin with.
Oh, yeah.
I think Robinson actually kind of fought against that because he didn't want to lose the connection to the DC Universe history.
Yeah. And I'm glad he didn't. It makes it's such a to talk about the JSA type stuff. It's such a generational story, this Starman, not only with his brother, his father, his mother, the other people who have been Starmen throughout history, all of them. He touches base with the original Wesley Dodds Sandman for an adventure.
Sand and Stars.
It's just fantastic. All the things he gets to experience when he really didn't want to do them at all the way back in the beginning. He was so against even becoming anything close to this. And just look at what it's brought his life to.
How he has grown.
Yeah. His first visit is with the Dibneys, Ralph and Sue. Gosh, I miss them so.
Oh, my goodness, yes. And Robinson was clearly one who understood their appeal better than, some writers or editors at DC. But they're just playing them as kind of this modern-day, slightly goofy Nick and Nora.
Yeah.
The Thin Man, as Snybjerg interpreted. They kind of look like, what if, an anorexic Danny Kaye had gotten together with Liza Minnelli?
Yeah, you're not kidding.
Yeah, beauty. But yeah, just hanging around, enjoying them. That's a great insight into their characters, too, that as long as they're together, wherever they are, it feels like home.
Yeah.
Even the afterlife, which is what happened to the pre-Flashpoint versions of the characters. They became like ghost detectives together.
Yep.
Just continued their wanderings.
Wish we would have explored that a little bit more, too. And if they were going to be that way, let's have some fun with them.
Yeah. Maybe team them up with the dead boy detectives from Sandman while you're at it.
Yeah.
Yeah, but so here they are spending a little time in Opal and clearly enjoying every minute of it, but not committing to anything.
Yeah. Just going to hang around for a while.
And then the Black Condor, another one of those underused DC superhero regulars, sort of continuity orphans that James Robinson seized on and brought in. It's kind of a shame that he's not given any dialogue in this issue. He's kind of treated like just another piece of the local, another like endemic species.
Yeah.
Another example of the local fauna to be looked at and looked up in the guide, stare at it in your binoculars, write it down in your birdwatcher's notebook. There's the Black Condor, and he will fight crime now. I am happy about that, and now I will leave.
Yeah.
That's kind of how he's played. It's a shame because he does have a personality.
Oh, yeah.
He had his own series for crying out loud. It didn't last very long. Brian Augustine wrote it, I remember, but he had a personality. And eventually he became a member of the Freedom Fighters. But here he's just kind of used as, I don't know, just an excuse for Jack Knight not to be so guilty about sticking around.
Yeah.
He's barely spoken any dialogue in any of his appearances in Starman, even prior to this. This is Robinson's last chance to give him something to say, and doesn't take it.
Yeah, and to a certain extent, I see that because he's over top the city as I make my wingspan with my arms, flying over what he's going to now protect. But yeah, it would have been nice to have some kind of dialogue with Jack before this all ends. The closest I think it came before that is in another issue of Starman, where maybe he doesn't know that's Adam Strange he's talking to. Never mind. You're right. He does not have much to say. He's not given much to say throughout the series. A missed opportunity there.
Yeah.
One of the only hiccups to this issue, I think.
Yeah. I mean, heck, I've said twice over now he had a personality, but the truth of the matter is he didn't have a very strong personality, and I would have thought Robinson would have appreciated a chance to develop it a little bit, put a little bit of his own spin on the guy, but nope. Nothing to it. Instead, he returns to a character that we know he really likes, a character he created, Lock, Stock, and Barrel, and to whom he assigned a personality that he finds appealing, that of the 50s hard-boiled tough guy. Yeah. And that's Bobo Benetti. Jake Bobo Benetti, super-powered bruiser.
And as I'm reading these pages the other night, since I have the car I do and I have Sirius XM, I listen to a lot of old-time radio shows, and I hear things like... like Boston Blackie or Broadway at Night or something like that. There's just all these very noirish period piece people and their extremely thick accents for whatever city they're in. And that's how I'm reading this character as I read this issue.
Heavy with unrealistically poetic lingo.
Yeah.
Just more slang words than the average person utters in a week.
Right. But it still put a little wry smile on my face.
Yeah. So here's Jack talking to him and learning that he's got a special arrangement with the Opal City Police Department. He's going to be kind of a crime fighter now, more or less legit.
Sipping martinis.
Yep, with anchovy stuffed olives.
Oh, God, so gross.
That's making me hungry, actually. I like anchovies. And then Charity.
Yeah.
One of the more interesting borrowed characters that Robinson made use of here. She was just a one-off horror host from one of DC's old horror anthology titles, like Forbidden Tales of the Dark Mansion, I think it was called.
Okay.
And Robinson, she was one of the few horror anthology hosts that Neil Gaiman hadn't already dragged into Sandman, so Robinson decided to lay claim to her, brought her in, and she's proved to be a pretty interesting character too. She's not just here as an exposition machine. Mm-mm. She actually has a life of her own, and as you see in this issue, probably more clearly than anywhere else in the run, as we know she's about to marry one of the O'Dare family.
Yeah.
She'll talk about a little crime-fighting legacy of their own there.
Oh, my gosh, yeah.
Robinson created for this world of Opal he's built.
A legacy inside the legacy.
Right you are. And as as the pages turn here, we'll see it. But she offers, in addition to Tom Callor, offers a little bit of an inky glimpse into Jack Knight's uncertain future. And it's here that Robinson's able to tease us that maybe Jack will be coming back someday.
Yeah, I hope someday.
Well, wasn't he in that blackest night issue of Starman, number 81?
Yeah, I think he was, but not quite the way I wanted him to come back.
Yeah, it's not exactly ideal circumstances.
Because that issue was Starman number 81,
right,
like you said.
Resurrecting dead numbering in addition to dead characters.
Which is fine, and I'm happy to have it in my collection, but I'm still waiting. It probably won't have. Still waiting for that one more Starman story to come out of Jack Knight.
Yeah, would have been nice if they could have worked that into Convergence.
Oh gosh, yeah.
And even that, I mean, the major problem with the Blackest Night issue is that James Robinson wasn't entirely writing on his own terms.
Yeah.
He was writing to the needs of a crossover, and in Convergence, it would have been the same thing, but he wouldn't have had to include zombies and crap.
Yeah.
Would have been fun to see which defunct continuity survivor he would have put Jack Knight up against.
Yeah. In the Shade, when the New 52 came out, the Shade series was certainly a welcome thing to see James Robinson revisit again, but I still want that one more Jack Knight story.
Yeah, well, the pain was still pretty acute. I remember I think I personally asked James Robinson at the Toronto Fan Expo.
Okay.
At about the time when both the Earth 2 ongoing series and the Shade Maxi series were announced. I raised my hand and asked if these things were going to be, if the Shades Maxi series was going to be set on the old Earth 2. But it was like, no, it's the New 52 continuity. And sure enough, it suffered, I think. It was still Robinson writing the Shade.
Oh,
it was still good.
And it still had those elements of Starman in it that had happened, but...
Right, we saw him sharing drinks with Mikhail Tomas.
Yep.
But, he no longer had the history with Jay Garrick, the things that defined him. It just... I just kind of felt like it had had several vital organs removed from it,
Yeah.
So I'm afraid we may be at a point now where it's going to be very difficult to go home again.
Oh, absolutely.
We'll just wait and see what the upshot of Convergence is. Maybe there will be some kind of backdoor into past continuities that will allow Jack Knight to show up. Maybe we'll get that anthology series that we were both so hoping for. That will have like regular peeks into no longer valid continuities.
Yeah, give me a little Blue and Gold and a little Starman. Oh, God.
Yeah, little of each.
Yeah.
With a twist.
Yeah. So after Charity, Jack goes and visits the O'Dares at the Opal City Police Department building, seeing that Clarence has become the commissioner of police.
Hope O'Dare is going to take some time away from Opal, vacation in Mexico, and Mason is still just as quiet and as stoic as ever.
Until you turn the page.
Yeah. And then we see a major turning point. So a glimpse beneath that stony exterior of old Mason. We see he notices something going on a rooftop opposite. We, the readers, never even get a chance to see the mysterious assailant.
Yeah,
no,
never.
But we're told later on that it's almost certainly going to be Alias the Spider, longtime adversary of the Shade, a member of the Ludlow family. And that's his killing spree. It actually crosses over later into the Hawkman series.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it sure does.
Shows up in St. Rock and commits an assassination that's then blamed on Green Arrow.
Yeah.
So then we get Hawkman and Green Arrow going after this Golden Age-related bad guy.
Yeah.
But here, all he's doing is, for reasons we don't quite understand, he's going to try to... his intended target is probably Jack.
Oh, yeah.
Mason then throws himself in there and takes the arrow through the chest after this heartbreaking little scene where he sees two divergent futures. There's that theme of divergent futures again.
Yeah.
After all this talk about the past throughout 80 issues, now we've got futures that Robinson's writing about. And he sees the happy future he has with Charity, and the other one is just him dead in the ground next to his late brother Matt. But he makes the only choice that he, as a loyal member of the Opal City Brotherhood of Police...
And I would even see go beyond that, not only the police, but in O'Dare himself, just on the bloodline, doing what he knows to be right. Throwing himself in front of everything to save somebody else.
Mm-hmm. The thin blue line between innocence and danger.
And right away, Charity knows it. Something's wrong. Something's happened. Mason's gone.
Oh, yes. And then a couple of pages of intense, panic violent emotion as they're caught up in this storm.
Yeah.
And then a more literal storm gathers above the Opal City Police Headquarters. All leading to, and then there's sort of Deus Ex Machina moment, which usually we're kind of conditioned to be against in storytelling, but it happens here. Top of page 22, big flash of magical white light. Suddenly the arrow is gone. The wound it created is gone. And Mason's bright future is returned to him. And page 23, that, Shane, is bar none my favorite moment in this entire issue.
Yeah, it's pretty spectacular.
Yeah, I don't think I even realized the charity. I'm sure this was something that Robinson had touched on or hinted at in an earlier issue.
Absolutely.
One of the many seeds that he sows throughout the length of the series. That Charity was at some point a protege of John Zatara, Master Magician.
Yeah. And it's not necessarily that, I don't think it's touched on earlier that this is going to be a result by the end of the story. It's just that she was, like you said, a protege. And here he's bringing it full circle to that mention of, I'm going to give you a gift now and save him.
A gift that I have come from beyond the grave, past the veil through which all magic users must one day pass.
Yeah.
To bring this gift to you. And there's the focus on that, the close-up panels of that painting, the portrait in the background, which looks exactly like a portrait that would have been painted in Zatara's early days in the 20s.
Sure.
That is just what a young Italian-American magician would probably have looked like in the 20s. And it's the silhouette of Zatara. You can see his mustache above his lip there as he bends down to kiss Charity's hand. Haunting.
Just fantastic.
And so that happened, and then Jack moves on and going down his list of goodbyes to say, dealing with a little bit of fallout from another recent storyline. Before 1951, before Grand Guignol, Stars My Destination was going on, and the 70s Starman, Michal Tomas, who is apparently bisexual and who has taken this lover named Tony, and they've been looking after little Teddy, Jack's son by Kyle, the Mist. And so he's... poor Michal is suffering a little bit of, you might say, PTSD after being stuck in the middle of this interplanetary war. And he's finding it difficult to settle back into the life he'd been leading and the identity that he'd had since his time as a captive carnival freak out in Turk County. So he's not quite sure that he's the same Michal that established this relationship with Tony, and he's feeling out of sorts. And he's really looking more like the Starman who appeared in first issue special number 12 back in the 70s. Even his hair is more the same style. He's got the sideburns back.
Yeah.
He's got the baggy purple pants. So he's kind of come full circle too here. He's kind of trying to deal with the self that he kind of lost during the time that he spent on Earth.
Yeah. That Stars My Destination storyline's kind of in the middle of the run, and it's not bad by any stretch. It's not my favorite.
Maybe it went on a little bit too long.
Yeah, but it's certainly not bad. That was probably my first encounter with reading this Starman, with reading Tom at all. I never read any of the stuff from the 70s.
Well, there really was only one thing from the 70s.
Okay.
He made exactly one appearance, and that was in first issue special number 12. And then...
Oh, then in
Starman. Yeah, that was the only time Michal Tomas appeared. Before James Robinson came along and brought him back. Because he was just determined that he was going to use every single character that had used the name Starman. He earned my undying loyalty with this move. He remembered one story from 1951, a Batman story when Professor Milo had used some kind of fear whammy on Batman to make him afraid of bats. And so he temporarily assumed the guise of Starman to defeat Professor Milo until he came to his senses, until the fear toxin worked its way out of his system. And so James Robinson seized on that and even found a way to work it into the tapestry of this long story he's been telling.
Yeah.
So, but he remembered Michal Tomas, the Starman of the 70s, who made, like the 1951 Starman, exactly one appearance, and he built it up into this really three-dimensional character.
Yeah.
Gave him a backstory. Figured eventually there was a Times Past tale, which it has a privileged place in my collection, I can tell you that. We're telling us what happened to Mikhail Tomas in the 70s after the events of first issue special number 12, which kind of ended with a cliffhanger of him about to engage a bruiser named Turan Ka, I think, from his homeworld.
Wow.
And that his story ended in the middle of that fight scene. So James Robinson told us what happened after that, how he kind of descended into debauchery, drugs, just the 70s disco scene. How he even confirmed what I always suspected, that he got his name from the David Bowie song, Starman, and revealed how he ended up in that freak show where Jack Knight eventually found him and rescued him. So, yeah, James Robinson did Mikhail Tomas a lot of favors. And the favors didn't end with this issue because, as you know, eventually James Robinson brought this Starman into the Justice League.
Yep, absolutely. And as much as that Justice League's kind of shunned even by myself, it's still nice to see him in it. Still nice to see him more prominent in the DC universe after this.
It's nice to see him making a move in this issue towards self-integration.
Yeah.
The Starman he was in first issue special number 12, the Starman he's been in this series, trying to find a way to reconcile them both.
Yeah.
And with a little help from his brother Jack and his lover Tony.
I love that he says, I now have two brothers, and just brings him into the fold even closer. And then on page 27, on to one of the more poignant visitations to the Shade.
Oh, yeah, you knew the Shade had to come up here someplace.
Or I should say the Shade comes and visits him in his store.
Yep. That's where we get a little explanation as to who the mysterious Archer was.
Yeah.
And then the Shade gives him one more Opal history lesson.
Those are so fantastic. And all those Shade journals all throughout the series, just absolutely wonderful to read.
Oh, yes. Just wonderful sort of pulp fiction prose.
Yeah, bonus content.
Kind of thing you'd never expect to see in the back of a comic book as of 1994. And yet, James Robinson made it happen.
And it just shows just how much more he had going around in his head for this story and the characters involved with it. Just what else was up there that he could have told if he had wanted to, and or if DC had wanted to. There just has to be more up there. You can't tell me that going through all those Shades journals, all these characters and all these intertwining storylines and bringing these nuggets from the early part of the series through to fruition, that there wasn't more up there to explore.
Yep, I feel your pain there, Shane, but all the same, I always respect the creator of any kind of entertainment who knows to quit while he's ahead, to get off the stage while leaving the audience wanting more.
Yeah.
That's what Jim Henson did when he ended The Muppet Show after 5 seasons. That's what Seinfeld did when they decided to end that series after X number of seasons before just starting to repeat themselves.
Yeah.
Just to stop while the material is still quality and let it speak for itself thereafter.
Yeah, such a great book-ended series. And like you say, to this day, still wanting more, but this stands up on its own.
It certainly does. And here's the Shade giving Jack a botanical metaphor for how he can grow new happiness wherever he ends up as long as there is love there. It's a way of telling Jack, and perhaps even more in a more veiled manner, the reader, to just be happy and move on.
Yeah. My time has come. You're going to move on, and here's how you do it. Yeah. And not only with that lesson to Jack, but even just the little background of, well, here's what I really love, roses that grow here. I do this, I come back here. That's kind of, it's a neat thing to see the Shade, who is traditionally a JSA villain, built into this compatriot, this ally for Jack, and really all of Opal City.
Yep. More of an amoral and yet sympathetic figure as opposed to just a flat-out two-dimensional villain.
Right.
That's kind of what Robinson had in mind. I read an interview with him at one point saying that Marvel had tapped him to write a Doc Samson series at one time, which kind of fell through. And a couple of the ideas he'd had for that ended up in Starman.
Oh, nice.
And one of them was that he had intended to use the Ringmaster in a similar way to what he ended up doing with the Shade here.
Oh, cool.
It's kind of the theatrical and hammy, but had with a yen for hypnotizing people into giving him their money, but not really that bad a person at base.
Yeah.
He just seen an awful lot of life and wandering around, being this itinerant show person, and learned some alternative lessons that way, shall we say?
Okay.
And I guess he and Doc Samson were going to learn a few things from each other, but oh well. Doc Samson's loss is Jack Knight's gain.
Yeah, absolutely. Jack Knight ends up curing him of whatever he had absorbed from Culp's shadow.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and this is a reference to there was one or two issues of Starman in which Jack Knight ended up taking a detour to the 30th century and met the post-Zero Hour Legion and the version of Starboy, Tom Callor, that was there, sort of planting the seed in his mind to become a Starman legacy bearer, become Starman. And the threat that they had to face while they were there was that the Shade's shadow self had sort of burgeoned and metastasized out of control and had consumed an entire galaxy. And so Jack had to go and zap him with his cosmic rod to cure him then. So here he is just giving him a bit of preventative medicine.
Yeah.
Stitch in time saves nine,
Right.
So it's kind of an interesting way, and perhaps a little symbolic, too, that this is the way the characters part, with Jack stabbing Shade in the chest with a cosmic rod.
Yeah.
And then, last but not least, he's addressed the past, and now he's going to address another phase of the future. As he passes the torch, the cosmic torch, to little Courtney Whitmore, the Star-Spangled Kid. Just love the weight. On page 34, Robinson actually weaves in the Young Justice Sins of Youth 5th Week event.
Yep, absolutely.
Somehow makes that matter.
Yep.
Very emotionally effective way. Just this one little black and white panel at the top of page 34. There's wee widow Jack Knight with a star-spangled bandana on his head, peeping up underneath adult Courtney Whitmore's armpit, looking at her with this look of awe and wonder. And like, wow, she knows what she's doing as Star Woman. Just that one panel, that one little caption, this one little nod to this total throwaway event, and Robinson just weaves it so effectively.
And yet that's
into the story he's telling.
Another guilty pleasure of mine is not only that 5th Week event, but the whole Young Justice series. Because I don't know that was well received when it first came out, and I loved that series. And then to not only see them do the Sins of Youth thing and bring Courtney into there, but then to see him go back, like you say, and use it here, just absolutely fantastic.
And don't be too guilty about liking Young Justice either.
I love that series.
They've got some pretty fervent supporters.
Yeah, it's a great series.
Ian Levinstein for one. Yeah, Brandon Christopher for another.
It's a good series.
Yeah. And so he passes on the cosmic rod and also his jacket and blast goggles and feels that his future is assured. Then, before he leaves town, he rediscovers art.
Mm-hmm.
So we were given some inkling of what he'll be doing to fill his days when he makes his way out to San Francisco, which is exactly the kind of place that you'd expect a guy like Jack Knight to fit in.
Yeah.
Yeah. A little note on the letter that Sadie left him at the beginning, where she says that San Francisco is a real city. You know what I mean? It's kind of a wink to the reader there. It's a real city. To us, it's as in non-fictional, but to them, as in more grounded and less caught up in metahuman nonsense. Yeah. Supervillains visit occasionally. Heroes do the same, but they never quite stay. They don't become. They don't leave stains on the fabric of life in the city.
Yeah, doesn't she mention like Gotham or something like that?
Yeah, like Gotham and Keystone and Opal, of course. So Jack discovers he's going to be a painter. That's what he's going to do with himself, and he bids a fond farewell to, he's already said goodbye to all the people that matter to him in Opal City, and now he says a few goodbyes to the things. It's another one of my favorite parts of this issue. Mm-hmm. Talking because... you and I both really we're both hoarders.
Oh yeah,
we appreciate the beauty of old things, and my dad's a huge antiques collector as well. If you ever go to our house, it's an old 1816 building built next to an old stone mill. It used to be kind of like a like an inn or a tavern.
Okay.
It was built in two halves. One was for the innkeeper of the miller and his family. The other was kind of like a halfway house for farmers who came to visit to grind their flour. And the mill is still there. It's a part of our property, and Dad has it just stuffed with old junk that he's bought at auctions and yard sales and such over the years. So through him, I've sort of absorbed an appreciation for older objects.
Oh, wow.
Antiques, and just the cachet of history that they impart. And so just being surrounded by these, by these old things, each of which has a story attached to it, each of which has character of its own. Quote, each piece I pass kisses my cheek or strokes my arm as we part. Handshakes and farewells of bakelite and rayon and Franciscan pottery. As Chris would say, magnificent.
Yeah. Beautiful
turn of phrase. And that's been another recurring theme is Robinson uses Jack as kind of a mouthpiece for his own enthusiasm about certain collectibles and certain forms of antiques and artworks. So one last blown kiss to those things, one last little mini love letter. And then Jack gathers up his boy, naturally he drives an antique roadster, and they head out across the fields of Turk County, leaving Opal behind.
And that is the end of Starman. Yeah. I also like the little when he's picking up Teddy. Come on, son, let's go for a ride. Then I make like a banana and split.
Yeah, he's been hanging out with Bobo Benetti too much.
Yeah.
Did you know that Opal City is supposed to be in Maryland?
No. I always thought it more in the mid-Chicago type way.
Yeah, I actually placed it in Colorado for whatever reason. Maybe it's just, I think, opal, precious stones, mountains, mining. Yeah. But apparently it's supposed to be in Maryland. That's where certain DC sources have located it anyway. So that means Turk County is also a part of rural Maryland.
Yeah.
It's like Daniel Corsetto country.
Right. Huh. Interesting.
So, let's catch this fallen star and put it in our pockets.
I can't say enough to anybody who's never, and I can't imagine anybody never hearing of it. If you've never tried Starman, try it. Sins of the Father can be a little bit slow, but it's by no means bad. And you get through that and you just stick with it and you get through everything to the end. It's a fantastic ride.
Yep. And a lengthy one.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
So, just see if you can find some of those back issues someplace. And there's certainly plenty of different trades and a couple of omnibuses.
Some of the trades are more difficult to find than others if you're going for the old-style trades. They were in short supply for a long time. Then the omnibus came out, and I do have a complete set of the hardback omnibus. And they are done in the right, correct format for me. They are not 4 inches thick. They are more of a little bit thicker than an archive type size, I think.
Right.
But still manageable to read, to carry around volume by volume. If DC would continue that size for every omnibus, I would never stop getting them, I don't think. That's perfect. The biggest one I have from DC, I think, is Hawkman, and that stretches my limit of what I like in an omnibus. Any more than that, it's just too huge. But yeah, once the hardbacks became out of print, they've reprinted them now into trade paperbacks. So there are certainly plenty of ways to get Starman. And I'm certainly glad that they did the 6 volumes for the omnibus.
Right. Series that definitely deserves the proper treatment.
Yeah, no more perfect way to present that.
Yeah. And if those of you listening are now jonesing for a little more podcast discussion of Starman, I'm going to do what I've done every time in the past that an issue of Starman is turned up for potential analysis here on the Time Bubble, and that is to direct you to our friend Matt Darth Kramer's Starman podcast, The Shades Journal. He actually, I think it's officially pod-fated by now. He actually hasn't recorded a new episode since 2009. Which is one reason why I felt a little more comfortable of us talking in detail about Starman here, because usually I just say, check out Lost in the Star, or Shades Journal, and see what Matt does with it.
Yeah.
But this is, after all, the last issue. It's the last chance we're ever going to have here until Blackest Night rolls along to talk about Starman on the Time Bubble. So I thought, let's grab that brass ring.
Yeah. I'm glad you invited me along.
Yeah, thanks. I'm glad you were able to join me.
Yeah.
I do have a few quick little tiny bubbles here to address here. And, these are always just very, very brief and slapdash. And they're all DC this time, too, which is not too funny, because I've said this on the Time Bubble a few times here, Shane, but the early 2000s were a time when I was buying a lot more DC than I was Marvel. Okay. They were undergoing a certain amount of growing pains.
Oh, sure.
Sort of a pupil stage under the leadership of Joe Quesada and Bill Jemas. I just didn't like the tone of their comics all that much. But I bought a lot of DC. And I got a few things here. One is Martian Manhunter, number 33.
That's another great series.
It's a part of the John Ostrander run. Tom Mandrake did the art for most of it, but this issue, this arc, which is called In My Life, Beatles reference, was done by one of my favorite Bronze Age artists, Eduardo Barreto. And it's the first issue of a story set in the past, John Jones' past life on Mars. And it tells the story of how he and his fellow Martians repelled an invasion from Apocalypse. See, there's a boom tube. Gorgeous Godfrey shows up. Kanto's there. Granny Goodness is there. The female Furies are there.
Oh, wow.
So it's a interesting chapter from John Jones's life as a manhunter on Mars. Then we have the 30th issue of The Titans. Mentioned earlier that when this series got underway, it was Devin K. Grayson writing it. But by this point, Jay Ferber had transitioned into the role of writer. So Peter Grau is the guest penciler, and Jimmy Palmiotti is the guest inker. It's the issue number 30 of the Titans is the final issue of a story arc about Cheshire, the assassin Cheshire, who was also the baby mama of the longtime Titan Roy Harper, alias Speedy, Arsenal, Red Arrow, etc., and the mother of his daughter Leanne. And this gives some closure to her story arc in that she's finally sent to trial for crimes against humanity for having nuked the fictitious country of Kurak and killed millions of people. She's basically committed genocide. And so what does the father of her baby do in this situation? Where do his loyalties lie? How does he react? What does he tell the kid? So these are issues that are addressed, not entirely satisfactorily for my money, but they're addressed somewhat. And it ends, spoilers, Cheshire doesn't die or anything. She's not even executed Nuremberg style. She's just sentenced to life imprisonment. And we all know how long that tends to last in comics. Yeah. Doesn't matter what kind of lockdown you're put in. If a writer needs you, you're sprung. And eventually she ends up as part of the Secret Six. Yeah. There you go. And finally, I've got Action Comics number 780. It's one of several Prelude to War lead-up issues for the Our Worlds at War mega event. I
enjoyed that story.
Was just kind of spooged all over DC Universe in the summer of 2001. Yep. But this is one of the better and more important and more dramatic and thrilling and interesting of these tie-ins. It's written by Joe Kelly. The art is by someone named Kano. And it guest stars the entire JLA. It has President Luthor. Remember, Lex Luthor was president at this time. Striking an alliance with Darkseid to help protect Earth from the incoming threat of Imperiex. And at the same time, Superman's attention is divided between fuming over that development and dealing with a rising threat in Eastern Europe, a mysterious figure called the General. Who has set up a power base in Pokolistan, which is kind of like the fictitious rogue state of the moment in DC at that time. You know what Bialia was during the Bwahaha era. And so the ruler of this rogue state is a guy known as the General, but the words kneel before ... on the cover should tell you which general exactly he is. Yep. And this is a character who would plague Superman for a number of years in the early 2000s. I'm still to this day not sure exactly what the ultimate revelation of this character was. Was he a version of Zod? Was he the same Zod from the pocket universe that Superman had executed with green kryptonite years earlier? Is he from some other kind of parallel universe? Is he someone who isn't Zod, who somehow telepathically learned about Zod? And I know at one point he took off that sort of red TIE fighter helmet, pilot helmet that he's wearing, and reveals Clark Kent's face underneath, just to confuse issues still further. But yeah, they issued so many false leads and red herrings and misleading twists as pertains to this this version of Zod that by the end, I don't think anybody really knew who, what, or why he was, or why bother. But anyway, this is the first confrontation between Superman and him. And the cliffhanger leads directly into Our Worlds at War, Shades of Kingdom Come happening, because in the late 90s, early 2000s, DC was forever making little moves. And,
pushing everything closer to Kingdom Come.
Right, to suggest that is the official future.
Yeah.
Because, it sold well, so they figured that's what people wanted to see. But, yeah, so a key event in Kingdom Come happens considerably earlier than it was ever meant to at the end of this issue, and that has major ramifications for the Our Worlds at War event. Yeah. So if you have any interest at all in the Our Worlds at War story, you can probably skip a lot of the things that are identified as preludes to it or crossovers with it, but don't sleep on Action Comics number 780. It does actually get my recommendation.
I read every one of those issues.
Every one of them?
Every one of them. And I enjoyed the storyline quite thoroughly. There was a great Wonder Woman crossover, too.
Oh.
Just fantastic.
So is that the Wonder Woman Our Worlds at War one-shot?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sure I have that one at home.
It was good.
All right. Well, I think the bubble has just about popped, Shane.
Yeah, that was a good journey.
Yes, indeed. Well, thanks for riding shotgun with me.
Yeah, thanks for asking.
And thanks all of you for being passengers on this little trip back to August of 2001. I hope you enjoyed the view of the starscapes through the porthole on the starboard bow.
Hopefully we did it some justice and sparked some interest in you, with you.
Yeah, we certainly hope so, because it's a series well worth anyone's time. Anyone's. Yeah. Like Chris likes to say, highest possible recommendation.
Absolutely.
For Starman number 80 or just about any other issue of the series. So, I think the time has come for us all to part company. So, thanks for joining us on this little junket through the time stream. We'll be coming back to you again for another run before too much longer. And I do mean that this time. And I'll probably be flying solo that time. But I'll be taking my laptop and my little Meteor microphone along with me to Stone Harbor. And hopefully I'll be cranking out some homebrewed episodes of the Time Bubble for your enjoyment in the not-too-distant future. I'm not going to make you wait another 7 months this time. In the meantime, if you wouldn't mind swinging by the comicforums.com and leaving a comment at the inevitable Time Bubble, the 24th Time Talkback thread, I would appreciate it. Always love to hear what you guys have to say about the things that we have to say. And if you have anything you'd like to add about any of the comics that we dredged up and discussed in this episode, please feel free to share and make the discussion 3, 4, 5, or 6-pronged instead of just 2. Okay. So, good night, happy reading, and we'll see you next time.